like President Lech Kaczynski was saying in Georgia in 2008, would not stop only attacking Georgia in 2008 and attacking part of Ukraine in 2014. I knew that this appetite, this imperial appetite, will grow if the world does not react to that. If the world does not react, if the North Atlantic Alliance does not stand up, does not present a tough stance, then we will see more attacks from Russia, to which perhaps sooner or later also my country, Poland, would fall victim to. And when I started as president of Poland, I knew that I had to do everything that I could to protect Poland from such a scenario. One has to use very clear and strong words here in the presence of Madam Vice President of the United States. Those who understood well what I was saying back then, speaking about the Russian threat, were precisely the representatives of the United States, were the representatives of Barack Obama administration and the president himself back then, the U.S. generals as well. And precisely thanks to their support, we were able to obtain the North Atlantic Alliance presence on the eastern flank. We're able to execute the strengthening of the eastern flank for the first time since we joined NATO in 1999. It was precisely a NATO summit in Warsaw, through, first and foremost, the decisions of the U.S. president and his team, but also through the decisions of other allies whom we were able to convince, has led to putting this presence on the eastern flank of the alliance. And symbolically, in Poland, the United States is the framework nation. At the same time, the U.S. soldiers came here and started their rotational presence in Poland. It is a rotational, but also a persistent presence, enduring presence. It is a back-to-back presence. So soldiers change, but the U.S. Armed Forces are present on our soil all the time. And that was a breakthrough. If we recall the words of President Lech Kaczynski, which I quoted many times, and he said those words to me back in 2008, he said, and I quote, "Andrzej, when U.S. soldiers are on our soil, when U.S. military installations are on our soil, when U.S. military equipment is put on our soil, then the whole world will be able to see that we are no longer a Russian sphere of influence. This is a true friendship." As Madam Vice President remarked today, a friend in need is a friend indeed. And that is why I'm really happy that today, when we are in need and when the NATO Eastern Flank is in need, the United States, by the decision of President Joe Biden, has deployed additional troops. The U.S. is deploying more troops, and the U.S. is announcing the strengthening of this presence in our part of Europe and also in Poland, because this is precisely the understanding of the geopolitics of strategic goals that have to be achieved by this geopolitics and by the free world. This is the understanding of the security. Is Polish-American presence today, if we look at the last couple of years, stronger than ever? Yes. Polish-American friendship, for sure, over the last 7 years of my presidency is stronger than ever before. And today's presence here today in Warsaw of Madam Vice President Kamala Harris is yet another strong evidence of that, just as the presence of all the representatives of Mr. President Joe Biden's administration here recently on our soil. And also, this is evidenced by the frequency of contacts that I have with the President of the United States. We frequently talk and discuss the most important security-related topics and our mutual relations. Yes, of course, whenever we speak about great politics and friendship, this is this friendship in great politics, and this is the friendship between states. For sure, this is the friendship between Poland and the United States of America. It is very strong right now, the strongest perhaps ever in history.
The next question will come from Nandita Bose of Reuters.
Hi, Madam Vice President. Thank you for, and President Duda, thank you for taking my question. President Zelensky has strongly asked for better air power in recent days. And my question is, what kind of alternative plans does the United States have to get materials to help Ukraine defend itself, especially now that you have declined Poland's offer on jets? Can you give us some specifics on what you discussed with the Polish leaders on this issue, Madam Vice President? And one for President Duda. The United States says, Mr. President, it was not consulted before you made the offer to make your jets available to the United States. Is that accurate? And did Poland act unilaterally in making an offer? If yes, why? Especially now that you have spoken about the strong relationship that U.S. and Poland has shared over the years. Thank you.
I want to be very clear. The United States and Poland are united in what we have done and are prepared to do to help Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. Full stop. In terms of the work that the United States has done thus far, we have, as you know, given military, humanitarian, and security assistance, and that is an ongoing process. As I mentioned earlier, Congress, the United States Congress, has now made a decision for $13+ billion of U.S. money to go to Ukraine and our European allies to assist in terms of both their security and humanitarian needs. We have also, just this past week, given $240 million in security assistance delivered to Ukraine, and that's on top of the $1 billion in just the past year that we have sent to Ukraine. I can tell you that the issue facing the Ukrainian people and our allies in the eastern flank is something that occupies one of our highest priorities in terms of paying attention to the needs, understanding it is a dynamic situation and requires us to be nimble and to be swift. I mentioned being swift in terms of accountability and consequence. We also fully appreciate we must be swift in terms of providing assistance where we can be helpful, and we will continue to do that.
So the US Vice President Kamala Harris there and the Polish President Andrzej Duda holding a joint news conference in Warsaw. Kamala Harris saying that the US commitment to Article 5 is ironclad. They are prepared to defend every inch of NATO territory. They're going to give another $50 billion to the UN World Food Programme, and also saying the attack on the maternity hospital in Mariupol is unprovoked and unjustified and was an act of violence. Let's bring in our security and defense editor, Deborah Haynes, who's in Lviv in western Ukraine. And Deborah, Kamala Harris saying that she's in Warsaw to highlight just what is at stake at this moment.
Yes, and she was having to dance quite a delicate dance there at the end, wasn't she, about that question about the MiG-29 fast jets, which is a proposal that Poland had to basically gift these jets, which are the kind of jets that Ukrainian pilots could fly, gift them to the Americans in return for equivalent aircraft to keep their air force going, and then presumably the plan would have been for those jets to then be given to the Ukrainians. But the US has made very clear that they didn't think that would be a tenable situation. And so it was a bit of an awkward moment in that you've obviously got allies very much projecting this image of unity. But clearly within that unity, there is division on exactly what kind of help can be given to the Ukrainians. It's a really live issue, this issue about how to close or whether to close Ukraine's airspace. It's something that the Ukrainian president said to Alex Crawford is something that he desperately needs to save millions of lives. But clearly there's a balancing act as well. If you do too much, especially putting in NATO jets into this airspace, it means you're in direct confrontation with Russian aircraft. And actually, I've been speaking today with our ambassador to Ukraine, Melinda Simmons. She's no longer in Ukraine. They had to move out to Poland. But she was saying to me too about this exact issue, that it's a really difficult one for world leaders to decide, because as soon as a NATO country becomes involved directly in this conflict, or NATO itself becomes involved, then you've got two nuclear powers on opposing sides of a war, and that could potentially then escalate much further. I also asked her, of course, about the attacks that have been taking place in this country, including that awful attack on the maternity hospital in Mariupol. And she actually said that she believes President Putin's forces are deliberately hitting civilian targets. Let's listen to what she said.
What it tells me, kind of watching this, is that it's a deliberate targeting of civilians, that it's cynical, that there is no way to write this off as an accident, a missile that's gone astray. And Russia has form in previous theatres of doing this. So it, if anything, really, it confirms that Putin's intention here is about more than just taking out strategic military targets. When he says he wants to go after the country, he means he wants to go after the country, and that makes this incredibly serious.
I mean, she was saying to me how she has phone calls from Ukrainian friends talking to her about their experiences being bombarded. She's clearly incredibly worried about the direction that this conflict is going in. She said how for the Ukrainian military, they are fighting back so much more than Russia had thought they would. She described Russia's actions here as a miscalculation. And she said that the more that the Ukrainians resist the Russian offensive, Russia just then turns up the heat, was her words, in terms of the military force that it's then using, including indiscriminate weapons. She believes that there will be further, unfortunately, targeting of civilians as President Putin tries to subdue this country. But the warning that she made was this country will not be subdued. It will either grind on in the conflict that we're seeing at the moment, a conflict of attrition, or there's going to have to be some other kind of diplomatic solution. I did actually ask her, just finally, whether she thought, and I was being careful, you don't want to be sort of hyperbolic or sensational about what's happening here, because the reality is already so awful. But I asked her whether she thought that had there ever been a greater risk of this conflict here triggering a much wider war across Europe, potentially even a World War III. And she didn't really want to talk about what she thought she described as apocalyptic prophecies, but very alive to the fact, everybody is, that right now the conflict here is not under control. And as the fighting continues, then of course the risk of it spreading also grows.
Deborah, thank you. You're watching Sky News Today. Coming up this afternoon, Sky News speaks to Ukraine's president in Kiev. More of Alex Crawford's interview with Volodymyr Zelensky after the break. hello again. Let's take a closer look now at the situation on the ground in Ukraine. Kamali Melbourne's here.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Well, I'm joined by Phil Osborne, Air Marshal Phil Osborne, former Chief of Defence Intelligence for the UK. Phil, thanks for being with us. Let's look at where we are on as we enter week 3 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What's it looking like on the ground? We'll take a look at this wide map of the situation.
So I think if we step back just for a moment, remember this is not where Russia planned to be. Day 2, day 3, they expected decapitation, take Kiev, replace the government, start to build a land bridge between Crimea and Luhansk, Donetsk. What we're actually now seeing is a stagnating Russian slog against really spirited, really capable Ukrainian resistance.
Yeah, we can see where the Ukrainians are still holding those cities, but the fight for the south does seem to be moving slightly more differently. Let's take a closer look at the southern picture right now and talk us through the Russian advances that have been made. And we've got there the only city that has been taken by Russia, the city of Kherson. Tell us what's happening in the fight for the south.
So what we're seeing is Russia probably executing what was originally part of the plan, that join up of the Crimea with the, if you like, the Russian-controlled, previously Russian-controlled states in the east. That's going on today. More success in the south and north, but not nearly as successful as the Russians would hope to be. If we look to the west, we can see Russia almost certainly trying to take Odessa to cut off Ukraine from the Black Sea, which will have a pretty significant economic impact from a Ukrainian, but also from a global perspective. And then coming right to join up with forces around Donetsk and Luhansk. And that's why we're seeing the particularly difficult, particularly dangerous, damaging conflict going on around Mariupol.
Yeah, and we saw those pictures yesterday evening, didn't we, of the strike on that maternity hospital in Mariupol. I mean, how is that a strategy that's going to help the Russians win this war by bombing a hospital?
So I think from a Mariupol perspective, we're seeing in Mariupol exactly what we would be seeing in other Ukrainian cities, what we already have seen. Should we be shocked? Yes. Disgusted? Yes. Surprised? No. This demonstrates Russia's lack of military options. Ukrainian armed forces have gone into the city, and therefore they really have got to try and take those cities or starve them out. That also gives the West a problem because it puts the West on the spot. There's a humanitarian challenge for the West, and this, therefore, is quite a useful political tool from a Russian perspective.
OK, let's take a look at the campaign further north. Now, as we've known for the past 2 weeks, there is that Russian convoy that's moving in on Kiev, 40 miles long, but hasn't really got very far. What's happened with that, Phil? And tell us about the tactics to try and take the...
So it's a 40-mile traffic jam, and it probably wasn't just one convoy. It was a number of convoys which have now come together. That feels quite stagnant, although Russia is trying hard to recover that logistical nightmare. Where it's also applying pressure around Kyiv is coming from the east, as we can see on the map, trying to encircle the capital, trying to put it under significant amount of pressure. What's also notable probably about this theatre is the Russians have finally admitted using the TOS-1 Alpha thermobaric weapon to the north and east of Kyiv.
Yeah, and we think that's about where it was used. Tell us more about this TOS-19 Alpha.
So this is a multi-launch rocket system, but what's different about it is it generates conventional blast, so really highly significant blast effects, far beyond normal artillery or air-delivered munitions. If you like, it's a conventional weapon of mass destruction. The kind of ways to use it under law of armed conflict, you'd have to be only using it against enemy of troops, if you like, military personnel, and in a way that didn't produce disproportionate effects. Certainly you shouldn't be using it if there's a risk of civilian casualties, and the use of this weapon in any built-up area, that risk is clearly there. Yeah, and this comes after we've heard, of course, about that strike on Mariupol and talk yesterday of chemical weapons, biological weapons factories. So the risk of escalation is always going to be there. We've seen a Russian narrative preparing the ground for potential use of chemical weapons, talking about the US and Ukraine having chemical weapons facilities in Ukraine. I think we can put no credence on that at all. But what that does is that starts to introduce some level of unbalance to an already difficult narrative from a Western point of view. It also gives the Russians cover to use chemical weapons in that dreadful circumstance that they think it's the only option available to them. OK, Air Marshal Phil Osborne, thank you very much for that. More from you throughout the day. Thank you. Kimberly.
Kamali, thank you. Well, Chelsea's shirt sponsor, the mobile phone and telecoms company 3, says it's reviewing its relationship with the club after the government announced sanctions on Roman Abramovich. The Chelsea owner has become the latest Russian oligarch to have his assets frozen as part of sanctions over the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In a statement outlining the sanctions, the government said Abramovich is associated with a person who is or has been involved in destabilizing Ukraine and undermining and threatening the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine, namely Vladimir Putin, with whom Abramovich has had a close relationship for decades. However, speaking from Tampa Army Base in Estonia, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has called for the government to go even further.
Every oligarch and those supporting Putin in any way should be sanctioned. So we want more sanctions against more people, further and faster. We will support the government in this, so they've supported the whole House on this, but they do need to go further and faster.
Well, joining me from the Chelsea Stadium, Stamford Bridge, is Sky Sports News reporter Rebecca Williams. And how are they reacting to this news there, Becky?
Well, it's a very surreal feeling down here at Chelsea this afternoon. This is an unprecedented thing to have happened, and lots of people very, very concerned. You know, I've spoken to a number of fans who've come down. Lots of them say that they do not know what the future of the club holds, whether Chelsea will ever be the same again. We spoke to a guy who came from Malaysia. He just wanted to get a photograph of him outside the club, but of course security is not letting anybody in. As you say, this licence means that there are various sanctions that have been brought onto the club, so they can no longer sell any merchandise. In fact, we spoke to a dad with his young son. They were the last people to buy a shirt here before the shutters went down. They can no longer sell tickets to people who haven't got season tickets. And so this is going to have a massive impact on the business model of the club. They are allowed to still pay wages. They're allowed to continue playing football. We know, of course, that the men's first team are playing Norwich tonight. The women are playing West Ham. But if Roman Abramovich's assets have been sanctioned and they've been frozen, how are they going to manage to pay these wages? So this is going to have a massive, massive impact on Chelsea. Now, in terms of the government, they've got to balance the idea of protecting what is a very iconic part of English culture, which is Chelsea Football Club, but at the same time making a very clear message and bringing down these sanctions on people who are alleged to have very close ties to Vladimir Putin. And so that is why we have seen these sanctions imposed on Roman Abramovich here today. Here is what Nadine Dorries has had to say about the situation.
Abramovich has been sanctioned, and it is important that he doesn't benefit from the club. Our priority is to ensure that the club is protected, that the fans are protected, and the national game. And the integrity of the club. The club can still play. Those with the existing tickets can still go and see the club play. And that is our priority, that the integrity of the club remains intact. But can Abramovich benefit from revenue that the club may earn? No, which is why we've taken the measures in terms of the licence that we have.
Obviously, the main issue is that Roman Abramovich put the club up for sale last month. That will now not happen. Whether the government going forward allow them to sell Chelsea so long as he does not profit from that, we will have to wait and see. But as you said earlier on, Kimberly, we're now hearing that their shirt sponsor, 3 Mobile, is reviewing its relationship with Chelsea. And once you start to see sponsors get cold feet, get worried, it has a massive impact on a club like Chelsea.
Rebecca, thank you. Well, the city of Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine is on the front line as Russia continues to advance. Russian troops are currently stationed to the north and east of Kharkiv, and officials say that yesterday's planned evacuations from the city were impossible. Joining me now from Kharkiv is Maria Avdieva. She's the Security and Disinformation Research Director at the European Expert Association. Thank you so much for talking to us this afternoon, Maria. Just what is the situation like at the moment where you are in Kharkiv?
Well, I am now in the city center, and it is devastated. And this night, again, there were strikes on the residential areas and on the historical center of Kharkiv. And I've got terrifying reports about the residential areas that are situated on the outskirts that are now without heating, electricity, water supply. And it is now where I'm staying -8 degrees Celsius, and it feels like -15 because of the wind. And it means that people are now staying without heating, hiding in basements, and have no possibility to leave the city. There is still some possibility to leave using the railway, but it is hard to get there, especially for elderly people, for people with disabilities, because they are stuck in their apartments, having no possibility to get to the railway station because there is no transportation inside the city.
Are people using their cars to get out? Those who have cars, are they trying to get out using their cars?
I think that mostly those who tried to get out already did so. So people who are now staying here in Kharkiv, and I would say that is half of the population, because it's like city is completely half empty. They have no possibility, either they do not have funds or no place to go. So some people don't want to leave because they are old and they say they'd rather die here than move to some other place where they know nobody and have nothing to do. So of course the situation is critical, but still what gives me hope is that we've got every day great reports about the on-the-ground fights carried out by Ukrainian military. So they are now pushing Russian forces back and trying to regain control over the small towns outside of Kharkiv that were previously kept by Russian forces, and the city of Chugui, for example, is one of them. But still, there are some small cities outside of Kharkiv under Russian control, and the situation there is also critical because they are completely blocked and people have no possibility to leave.
For you, what is your life like? Do you have water? Do you have electricity? Do you have food? What do you do each day?
Well, luckily, I do have the supplies because I mean electricity and water, what is most important, and heating. And my house, my apartment was not struck. There was the shortage of electricity for 3 days when I had to move, but then it was we had it back, and I'm living now in my apartment. I walk out to outside to fix and take videos of what is happening and what is happening to Kharkiv every day, and then try to share this information, because Russia continues spreading the lies about they are not hitting residential areas. And I have seen Minister Lavrov today saying the same things, that Russia is not killing civilians. And that's why I see my role in providing the information from the ground so that many people will see actually the Russian war crimes here. Of course, there are food shortages, so it's not, you cannot get anything. So what would you like? But then I'm not starving. There are something left at the shops. You can find something, but of course, it's like would be probably bread and yogurts, no more than that.
I just want to pick up on what you said about Sergei Lavrov. He's, of course, speaking in Turkey, Antalya. This morning he was speaking with your foreign minister. I want to ask you this. As your role as a security and disinformation research director at the European Expert Association, Sergei Lavrov said that that maternity hospital that was targeted in Mariupol, that they had gone to the Security Council 3 days ago and had said that there were no women and no children there. What do you make of his claims?
This is outrageous lie, and what I see now happening in Russian media landscape, because I continue monitoring it closely, I do not even call it disinformation. It's just some complete reality, different information reality. I would compare it to what was happening in Hitler's Nazi Germany. So like something completely different. It's not even, you cannot even have a name for that, because they block any information from the outside world and making their own reality in that reality. This is some military operation. No civilians are killed and no Russian losses here. But what we see here is, something very different from what Russian officials say. And at some moment, then they will have to admit the truth, because they cannot hide it from Russian population for a long period of time.
Okay, Maria, we wish you well. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Just a couple of lines out of Washington, where the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says that they are very concerned about the potential use of chemical weapons in Ukraine. And she says that the use of chemical weapons would be a grave mistake. Those two lines coming out of Washington, where the Foreign Secretary is at the moment. Now, the Ukrainian city of Mariupol has been surrounded by Russian troops and bombarded by attacks for 9 days now. Multiple efforts to create humanitarian corridors out of the southern port city have failed, but there are more evacuations planned for today. And joining me now from Kiev is Roman Skilarov, who managed to flee Mariupol with his mother and his brother. Roman, thank you so much for talking to us. How did you manage to get out of Mariupol, and what was that journey like?
Thank you for this interview. Yes, it was hard to leave that city because all my family tried to stay there, and I tried to convince them to move immediately on 24 February in the morning, and they tried to stay there. And after I convinced them, we just pack our luggage and move with hope that in few days we come back. But as we seen, it's impossible, and we lost connection with all our friends and relatives. My grandmother's still there.
So you have no news out of Mariupol at the moment?
No, anything. I just can see some Twitter and news about what's happening there from photography and video. And a few days ago, I saw us Army of Azov battalion posting Twitter video with the house which is burned, and that house was my home. I was shocked.
You saw your house burnt?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Have you seen the pictures today of that maternity hospital that was targeted?
Yes, Are you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Roman. You're frozen, but we can... Yeah, there you go. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, I saw news yesterday about that hospital, number 3. As I know, I was shocked because it was in the center of city, and by the way, I was born in this city and this hospital. Yes.
And so where you are now in Kiev, what is the situation there?
Yes, I'm not exactly in the center of Kiev. It was closest city, small town, Peryaslov. It's a small town near Kiev.
Because we're hearing that the mayor of Kiev says that 2 million people have fled the capital.
Yes, yes. There is a lot of people also run away from Kiev and trying to escape, but it's hard. It's hard because it's blocked many ways and roads. So.
What are you going to do, Roman? You can't leave the country, can you? Because
yes.
of your... So what are you going to do?
For a moment, I have to help my mom and my small brother to keep them safe, and I have to care of them. And we are just to try to help each other, support each other, and hide. Because every day we hear in the air sirens, and it's scary. I hope in a few weeks or days it will finish and we can live our life as before.
What will you do if the Russians come into Kiev, Roman?
I cannot imagine. We feel that if they come into us, they just will kill us. It's horrible.
Have you ever thought that you may have to fight?
As I don't have military experience, best way for us is support and be volunteers in a way what we can do. So as I can help my mom and small brother, this is best way instead to fight if I don't have experience with this, and I prefer to peace way.
How old is your brother, if you don't mind me asking?
Yes, 19 years, but he also don't have this experience, and my mom is old woman, so I have to care of her.
Do you think that you will move out to the west and try and go further away from the Russian advance?
Yes, I think about this also, but at the moment I don't have where to stay there, and we are afraid because road is a dangerous place. I saw many videos that in a road these terrorists just kill people during this movement.
Are you with other people who also escaped Mariupol, or are you entirely on your own there?
No, only 3 of us. My mom, my brother, and me. We escaped the first day, 24 February. Many of other people decided to stay because they was thinking that it's nothing serious. But from morning I hear it was explodes and bullets. It was a scary situation, and I decided the best way to run away.
Roman, thank you so much, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.
You're watching Sky News. We'll be back in a moment. This is Sky News today. It's 1 o'clock. The headlines. The mass graves of Mariupol. Now residents in Ukraine's besieged city say they are being bombed again as an aid convoy is forced to turn back. Foreign ministers for Russia and Ukraine meet in Turkey, but with little sign of any progress and some veiled threats.
Those who are pumping Ukraine with weapons, they need to understand that they have responsibility for their actions.
The US Vice President calls for an international war crimes investigation into Russia as Ukraine's president tells Sky News the West must act now.
If it's prolonged this way, yes, you will see they will close the sky, but we'll lose millions of people.
As more than 2.3 million refugees flee the war, here the Home Secretary announces a new streamlined approach after criticism.
Ukrainians with passports will be able to get permission to come here fully online from wherever they are and will be able to give their biometrics once in Britain.
And Roman Abramovich is sanctioned. The Chelsea Football Club owner is added to the UK's restricted list, putting the team's future at risk. Good afternoon. For more than a week now, the city of Mariupol has been surrounded by Russian forces and bombarded from the air. Hundreds of thousands have been without water and electricity, and bodies have been left uncollected in the streets. The city's